Good morning, Dr. Davidson. Thank you for joining us this morning. I think I've mentioned it a couple times. Folks know the housekeeping rules. Please try to keep your phones on mute during it. So Dr. Davidson, I did want to ask though on format and the flow of today, do you want to hold Q&A till the very end? Will you just have intermittent pauses? Do you want folks to use the chat room? What's your comfort and preference?
Yeah, we will hold the Q&A to the end, though I think please use the chat as vigorously as you wish.
Great.
If you could help me there,
yes,
Leslie, kind of monitor that. So especially if thoughts are coming into your mind as we progress, just put them in the chat. But I hope I could just keep what I have to say to about maybe 15, 20 minutes and no more to give room for a lot more conversation.
Wonderful. And those of you, if you're new to Zoom, there is a chat function at the bottom of your screen. If you move your mouse cursor over that, you'll see chat. The chat box will open. You can type in your questions and we can just keep a running flow and address them after the presentation. So for those of you that didn't hear me already, my name is Leslie Whitted. I'm one of the volunteers here at Fourth Presbyterian on the Adult Education Committee. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning for a 5-week series with Dr. Davidson. For those of you that may not be familiar with him, he is the Dean of Faculty and Vice President of Academic Affairs at McCormick Theological Seminary. He's also the professor of Hebrew Bible Old Testament. He's the author of several books, and we're very thrilled to have him for this 5-week series. So in the interest of time, we're already a few minutes late. I'm going to open it this morning with a brief prayer. And as I was thinking about this, I was looking around and I found an old ancient Welsh prayer that I just thought I would read. So we'll do a brief prayer and then we'll kick it off to Dr. Davidson. Grant, O God, your protection. And in your protection, strength, and in strength, understanding, and in understanding, knowledge, and in knowledge, the knowledge of justice, and in the knowledge of justice, the love of it, and in that love, the love of existence, and in the love of all existence, the love of God and all goodness. Amen. Thank you all very much for joining us. Dr. Davidson, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll go on mute and monitor the chat.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Once again, happy to be with you in this series. Well, this is our commitment for the next 5 weeks, and we'll get used to each other. So very quickly, you probably have seen the advertising on the course. It's an exploration of women in the book of Judges and an examination of these various women. So let me share my screen and you'll see presentation stuff coming up there. Right, there we go. So women in the book of Judges, one of the intriguing set of books in the Bible. Well, there's no shortage of intriguing books when you really sit down and read much more intently than you would normally have been asked to read. So why do I go with Judges? Well, this book has lots of women. It's a book about women. You know, comparatively, the only other book that has a lot of other women in it is Genesis. But, you know, we talk about, by comparison, Judges has a lot more. Genesis has 50-something chapters, and Judges is half the size of Genesis. So in terms of the space of the book, these women are a whole lot more. And then particularly interesting that we will find is when you compare what the women are doing in Genesis versus what's happening in Judges, these are much more intriguing women to pay attention to. What we have in the book are women who are named and unnamed. And this becomes an important point of conversation of what we can glean and determined by the fact that certain women are named and others are just not named. It's not that they don't have a name, but the storyteller doesn't find it important to let us know the names of these women. We will see a great diversity of women within the book. Women are occupying various roles. Some of them are wives. I mean, most of them in some ways will be wives and daughters. Some are named as daughters of particular men. And of course, one of the things we notice about biblical texts is the way in which women are presented not as individuals on their own right, but in terms of how they're related to a man. So they're either the wife of a man or the daughter of a man. They're never women in their own right, except in a few places. The other thing we will see is the roles that women are playing. Today we will look at Deborah, who is regarded as a prophet. So she is one of those striking leaders in the book. But then there is also a sort of ethnic diversity of women. We will also look at a Canaanite woman. And so they're not only women from within, but they're women from without. They're women from various social classes and categories. One is a secondary wife. One is the daughter of a military figure, a major military figure. So this broad diversity are things that we will see and we pay attention to as we go through the book. The other interesting thing I want to draw to your attention, why this book is so striking, is the idea that the women are the frame of the book. So from the start, we would see the story of a very small, short story in chapter 1 of a woman by the name of Exile. And then when we get to chapter 21, it ends focused upon an incident that occurs where women at Shiloh are, however you want to take it, to interpret it, we will talk about this at another point. They're kidnapped at the end of a war to be brought back to the Benjaminites to be made wives. So the men go hide in secret when the women come out to the watering hole, and they basically go and there's a free-for-all, and they just grab whichever woman they want and take them back as wives. So there is this is how the book ends in chapter 21. But
excuse me, could I interrupt? I'm sorry. I know you're right on a roll there. There are about 6 other women in a different chat room that they got in through what the email said, but there's no class there. So
Jennifer, this is Leslie. I'm the co-host here. Could you ask them to look at the email that Michael sent at about 8:30 this morning and use that link?
That's the one they're using.
That's right. And Leslie,
Okay.
I tried to tell you this. He didn't include a password, and many of us use passwords.
Yes, yes. Thank you. If you could just ask them to leave that meeting, and I will text Michael and we'll let Dr. Davidson keep going. Apologies, I'll get Michael on it as quick as we can.
Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. Yeah. Yeah. So, right. So, when you said there are 6 women stranded, I'm like, okay, I missed that story in the book of Judges. But
sorry, I apologize.
Fine. That is fine. That's fine. But it's so appropriate to what we were. It did not sound out of place. That's the thing. So yeah. Anyway, right. So it's this is the frame. Now, what I'm doing, of course, is presenting a very different way of thinking about the book of Judges than some of you may have been introduced to it. Where it is the story of men, it's the story of a whole number of different things. Now, let me go back to chapter 1. There's some similarities between chapter 1 and chapter 21. And so, of course, some obvious differences. In chapter 1, Exile, who I'm talking about, is a single woman, versus we don't know the numbers in chapter 21 of these women. Both of these stories about women involved as prizes of war. Both of them involve women who are traveling or riding on donkeys. Well, not so much 21, but chapter 19, 20, we'll have a woman riding on a donkey. Exile rides on a donkey. Both of them are involved in a sort of the trade or traffic of women. Because what happens is when the book opens, we get the portrait of the first judge, Caleb. He, in the middle of a war, basically makes the decision, as you would have, I mean, this is a familiar story. Whoever defeats the giant, well, it's not a giant here, but whoever defeats our enemies can marry my daughter. That's how Axa gets into the picture. She becomes the prize of war to this valiant warrior that wins the victory, and her father hands her over. And a similar kind of thing where it was happening in 21, but it's the principles are the same. Of course, the way it happens is quite different. Axa comes to our attention because her father seemingly is handing her over to this man who's supposed to be this great warrior, and in doing so, he provides property for them. But then the property is not that great. And we're not too sure where we need to go with this one. Either he or her go to the father and say, and they say to him, look, give us the proper land, the land that actually has water. Most persons are inclined to think that the textual challenges there indicates that she is the one who basically says to her husband, her new husband, my father is trying to cheat us. Let us ask for better land. Okay, so that's the kind of a frame of the book. This is to introduce you to the varying fortunes of women in this book. Okay. One thing, of course, to hint at is when we read this book, we're asking now, how is the story being told? If the story is being told to us about the way in which now the people of God are making their way in a new space, who gets attention and who does not get attention? Whose point of view is grounded? And the way in which the story is told, it's to tell the story of the men, and the women seem to be incidental. Of course, the men in this book are not that great. They are not that fantastic men, and they don't have a great handle on things. So it's this tension of this male point of view that's trying to set itself up as being successful when there's failure all around. And so the male point of view in terms of how it advances itself is really a disaster. And in doing so, it tries to eclipse and erase the space and the story of women. Now, one of the things we know is that in times like these, by times like these, when communities are at the starting up point, there's very little specialization on who does what, because everyone's contribution is necessary. Everyone's work is important, and therefore one of the things that we would see is women taking lead in a number of different areas. It is when communities become a lot more settled with a lot more resources that you start to see the types of specialization that will lead to the suppression of women. And sometimes for many people, this feels counterintuitive, where they think that early sort of a frontier societies, there is no evolved sort of gender politics. In fact, that is not the case. It is the evolved societies where the gender politics become a lot harsher and women take on secondary roles. Okay, so quickly into the story for today, or story for today, which is the story of Deborah. And Deborah is presented, and this is what I'm looking at is, if you want to go to your Bibles, is Judges chapters 4 and chapter 5. And Judges chapter 4 and chapter 5 are parallel chapters. By that I mean they're telling basically the same story in different ways. In chapter 4 it is a prose narrative. In chapter 5 it is a poem. And chapter 5 we believe to be the earlier one because poetry is seen as the earlier form of literary composition. So we have the song that is supposed to be Deborah's song celebrating the military victory. And then the prose narrative perhaps was written much later on to tell the story in a different way. Chapter 5 is seen as one of the earliest compositions in the Bible, one of the earliest compositions that we could date, and that gives us a window into what early ancient Israel would look like. And between these two chapters, Deborah is presented to us as a judge, as a prophet, and a military leader. These are significant and important roles. And one of the things I want to draw to your attention in chapter 4, no one seems to be surprised that, oh wow, this is a woman doing all of this stuff. That it feels and seems and it appears as if it is basically a natural process that is occurring. In fact, when the captain of the army, if you want to call him that, Barak, comes for consultation with her, we could see the level of deference that he pays to her. And she is the one who is creating and working through the military strategy with him. It's not him. But Deborah is combining a number of different roles. So she's doing military strategy, but she's also the sort of religious leader. And Barak, as a military leader, would defer to her religious insight, because it's always important to understand that prophetic figures or other kinds of people with advanced sight were critical to military strategy. They were the ones who would say the conditions are propitious for you to go fight this war, or no, you shouldn't, because if you go, you're going to lose. And that's the kind of thing that we see Deborah doing with Barak, basically instructing him and pointing out to him, this is going to turn out well, but it is not going to be for your honor or glory. It's going to be a woman, for a woman. And at this point in time, we're thinking, wow, she's going to win the fight or win the war. But of course, we'll see how it becomes quite different. The two things to raise here is the way in which we have to understand Deborah. So in chapter 4, verse 4, most of our English translations will characterize Deborah as the wife of Lapidoth. And many feminist interpreters have been asking, is this so? Because the Hebrew the Hebrew in that phrase is a little bit uncertain. Why not describe her as a fiery woman? The Hebrew essentially is Ishet Lapidoth, which means woman of or wife of something, and Lapidoth. Now, Lapidoth, we really don't know what that word is. And the tendency for almost 400 or 500 years of English translations has been to think it is a man's name. But there's no other man with that name in the Hebrew Bible. There really isn't anybody that has a name that resembles that. And why the impulse to do this is because, well, we think she's a woman, therefore, and we see Ishet there, she has to be the wife of somebody. So even if the word is incomprehensible, what we want to do is to make her a wife. There is very few other indications of her being a wife in the entire in these two chapters. So feminists have been saying, why the derivative status? Why that choice? Why not make her translate the phrase a fiery woman? Because the word Lapidoth is the plural for the word torch. So she's a woman of torches, or she's a fiery woman, and speak about it as her character. Of course, in chapter 5, we see her described as a mother in Israel. And again, you could understand that term could mean a whole lot more than just someone who is physically giving birth to children. That she is carrying out this broad maternal role in the community, which would involve a broad range of functions, including protection, provision, and that sort of a thing. Okay. Move forward in the story, and we end up with the character of Yael, which is where, as the war turns out, the military commander of the Canaanites, his forces are routed, he escapes, runs away, finds himself in this strange place where there's a woman in a tent, and he basically says, look, help me. And she does. She extends hospitality to him. And some will argue that she seduces him through the ministration of giving him milk, makes him fall asleep. He falls asleep in some reclining position in her body. And when he falls asleep, she takes a stake and drives it through his head. This is an important thing. So, and of course, that's how the battle ends. And now we see the sort of a prediction that Deborah had of how the glory goes to a woman. Chapter 5, we see the effusive praise for Jael in the song. But this is how the thing ends. So here's this one woman who now takes it upon herself and enters into the military strategy and kills this man. Now, one of the interesting things is the interpretation of Jael and the role that she plays. We will see this in various European artworks. So I'm just going to give you a sample of some of them, of how she gets depicted. And this is where the issue comes up of is she using her sexuality in addition to other things as part of the military strategy. And the three photos on the top are different artworks from various points in Western art of the depiction of Jael. Now, several questions come up, and as you could see on the far right photo of how muscular that artist is presenting her, because the question is, how can a woman defeat or drive a stake through the head of this sort of strong military man? And there are a number of different questions that are answered. And of course, what this artist is trying to say is, well, she is unusually strong. And then other artists will say, no, she is unusually seductive. And that it's not just the milk, it's not just that she is mothering him, she is also engaging him in there is some sex going on. And here is a man who is so fast asleep in that post-coital state that he doesn't know what's happening. Contrast that with a picture I have at the bottom, and this is where a lot of this interpretation feeds in, which is a depiction of the story of Judith. And where there's a similar kind of thing happening, where Judith is seducing, and this one is where it's very clear in the book of Judith. Judith seduces the Assyrian general Holofernes because she's trying now to revenge the defeat of her people and then lift the Assyrian hegemony from them. And after she seduces him, she is able to cut his head off. So there are those stories of women who then engage in this sort of a thing. Final thing I want to point to, as chapter 5 ends, is this sort of a moving scene that ends the poem of the Canaanite general Sisera, his mother, who is staring through a window, wondering when her son is going to return. And if he hasn't returned, perhaps what he's doing is celebrating his victory by actually capturing women. And the men who he has with him are now dividing the spoils. Among the spoils that they have will be women that they will take back as wives. Of course, there are some feminists who remind us that this is really not marriage by consent, or even marriage in the way in which it was operated in the ancient world, and that we have to call that rape. That women are prizes of were captured in war and forcibly taken into marriage, rape should be somewhere in the back of our minds with that. And so here it is, the pictures of these three different women, okay, the kinds of diversity that we have, and we are seeing in this story. Now, all of this is set within the story of ancient Israel that goes to try to occupy this land under the sense that God has given it to us. And this is the way in which this story is enacted. This is the kind of troubling sort of implications through which we have to come to terms with the way in which the book of Judges presents itself, and what are the consequences. So I have here a few points for conversation, which we don't necessarily have to go through, but just to summarize some of the important things that I've been trying to raise on how the Bible gets represented, represent women. I mean, certainly one of the things that we see is Deborah as an access and a channel to God. So there is the authentication of women as religious leaders who can perform credibly the ministry in holy things, if you want to call it that. But we also see the lethal capacities of women in war. And then the conditions under which women have to survive. Jael recognizes that if she wants to have a life that's worthy of something, there is a fight that she has to engage in. And that fight is not metaphorical, but it is an actual fight, and having to do the kinds of things such as killing people in order to survive. So one of these strategies for survival. And we'll come back to this in some other weeks, the kinds of implications that war that we find with women. So let me pause there, which I think gives us enough time for big and broad conversations. Okay, so do we have comments or questions already, Leslie, or people who have new ones?
No, not so far in the chat room.
Okay.
So, but I'd like to see, there may be folks that have dialed in by phone only that may have questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll open that up to anyone, phone or video, that might have some questions for Dr. Davidson. Quiet.
I do.
Good.
I do. Dr. Davidson, I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything, so I'm just going to say this. Women go to the place to get water by themselves, and the men are supposed to leave them alone, but they don't. They come and they capture them and take them away from themselves. And in battle, especially, I forgot her name, the one who stabbed the man in the head with a dagger. What is her name?
Oh, Jael.
Okay, she stabbed him because she wanted something. And when there is war, part of the settlement is giving up women. And you don't have to put in a lot of detail. I just want to make sure that I'm following well, since I had a rocky beginning.
Yeah, you're sort of correct, but of course, I am pushing us to think about it not so much in the way that there is this great, wonderful gentleman's agreement, that here are these rules that exist and people follow them.
Okay.
So particularly at the very end of a war, there is really no, here's the treaty we sign and you turn it over. It's, look, you're defeated, so you don't have much choice. So you could sign or don't sign. This is what's going to happen. We are going to take all of this stuff. We are going to do it. And part of what I'm trying to do is really to force us to enter into the experiences of war, without thinking about it in very clinical, detached ways. That there are harsh implications for it. So that's one. And the second thing, of course, you're correct about the watering holes. There's several stories in the Bible where the watering hole, the well, was really the place to meet women. Sometimes they are wonderful, meet cute, romantic stories, as in the case of Isaac and Rebecca, where there is this wonderful love story that is enacted there. And other times they are not, as we will see in chapter 21 of it. But for the most part, it was the agreement, or the sort of social convention, that this would have been the most public space where a woman would potentially come into contact with a man who was outside of her immediate family. And therefore it was both risky and also one that had to be framed with some set of practices to ensure not necessarily the safety of women, but also to sort of keep some of these issues related that the community wanted intact. Okay.
Thank you very much.
I did have one question posed. We're wondering if it would be possible if you could send us a list of the chapters that attendees should read prior to each class, just to give them a bit of a heads up. If you have that, we can manage the logistics of it. If you share it with Michael, that would be great.
Yep.
All right. Any other question? I mean, it's a quiet group this morning. I'm so used to, we haven't had coffee yet.
Hi, I'm Sue Graham, and I just finished reading the story about Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well, and my reaction to that, and then to this one, which it makes me really want to go back and read Judges, your little introduction of this, is how strong the women at the well are. The jail, is that how you pronounce it? That she was at the well singularly, it sounds like, and so that even that it shows a bravery to them. Do you think that, I don't really know what my question is, do you think that that is the point of showing how strong and brave women are?
Yeah, yes, in some sense. Though in the case of Giles, she's not at a well, she is in her tent.
Okay.
Which raises its own set of questions, that because we are told she is the wife of Heber, the Canaanite. And so what does it mean that it is her tent and not his? Is she a secondary wife or something of the sort? But definitely, I think the issue of strength and bravery does come up. The Bible tends not to be as forthcoming on the questions of emotions as we would like it in every case, or even certain types of other adjectives and descriptive insights. But we could conclude definitely it's about the bravery, because if you kind of follow the story from Deborah's earlier comment that the glory in this case is going to go to a woman, and sort of surprisingly it turns out to be not the woman we thought it would have gone to, but another one who then emerges later in the story, we still are given a glimpse that this one who just suddenly comes into the story is the one who receives the glory, and therefore one whom we have to in some ways praise as being brave strong, however we're going to have to define strength, because I think here it's not just a matter of the physical strength. There is a great deal of intuition that's taking place to calculate, because she is not in the middle of the battlefield. She's far away. This man runs as far as he could to save his life. And so there is some intuition that's taking place for her to make the calculation. Oh, this is what is going on. This is who is at my door. This is what's at stake. And then making all of the choices to then create the strategy in order to take him out. So there's a whole lot of different types of qualities that are being displayed here.
Yeah, that's amazing to me. And then the other thing that when you were talking made me think is that Deborah was willing to give that glory to somebody else.
Yeah.
Which a lot of men aren't willing to share the glory.
Right, exactly. And that's sort of a community of women where there's a sense of, I don't have to be doing this all on my own. If I don't, then perhaps there is someone else who could pick it up. But or I do my part and I hand it over to someone else to do their part. Yes, that definitely is one of the striking things here.
Okay, thank you. I love this so far.
Mm-hmm. But of course, just to say, when you read the Jesus with the Samaritan woman at the well, you need to read that story with all of these other sort of male-female pairings, well, stories from the Old Testament. That's at the background of that John chapter 5 story. And understanding the types of conversations where it goes to, and the surprise of the disciples when they come back and see Jesus talking to a woman. No, you're not supposed to be doing that. And why Jesus is having these sort of intimate conversations with her about her married life. Because it's like here, this is where men and women meet in that social place. Okay.
So we did have a question and a comment. Thank you very much from the way that you're framed this story. It's very helpful and raises many thoughts, particularly in our time today. Why do you think the men writing this story included so many women in Judges?
Yeah, it's always one of those perplexing questions that we have to engage. In one sense, they could not get rid of all of the women and the memory. The memory of women's contribution could not be completely erased. I mean, and I think it's important for us to recognize that. And we do hear that, we do know that there is, in many instances, a sort of like a systematic attempt to erase the contribution of women and the contribution of certain types of women as well. And as best as those attempts are, they fail to some extent. So that this story cannot be told without Deborah and Jael. You cannot talk about now the death of the Canaanite general Sisera without including it. So there is no other choice. So we get to hear these because that's what happened. The second thing too is that some women become important plot points for the work of the men. So we'll see a little bit later on, say for instance, when we get to the story of Samson, Delilah becomes this important agent in the Samson story. She has to be doing stuff that the men cannot do. So that's one thing. Now, the third thing where some people suspect is that the women are set up over and against the men to make the men look weak and inadequate. There is an argument that the book of Judges tells the stories in such a way to make the case Israel needs a king. Here is what happens when you don't have someone who is called, anointed, sanctified, selected, all of these other words that you want to use, and responsible to God and the people for their safety. Throughout the book, there is, we'll move from leadership to leadership to leadership to leadership, from failed leadership to failed leadership to failed leadership. So there's this theory that you have to tell this story in such a way in order to justify having a king later on. And one of the ways in which to kind of pierce through the weaknesses of the men is to set them alongside of women who might expose the foolishness, the weaknesses of the men. That's one theory, and we could debate that because when we get to the stories, say, of David, it's not that David is much smarter than some of these men. I mean, David makes a number of different choices that aren't well thought out, aren't the best. And Solomon, likewise. So we have kings who will fail. In fact, when you read through the entire book of Kings, the two book of Kings, there are only two kings of all the many that we're reading whoever kind of can be seen as successful kings. So there are ways in which we could debate that, and there may be other theories as well that we could put forth.
Thank you. Suzanne, it looks like you might have a question. No?
Yeah, I do. Since this was a very early story, and roles were not quite so defined, a woman could be doing strategy and have her own house, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me it's possible that this was written by a woman. I mean, we assume all the scriptures were written down by men, but really they all started orally, like in every culture. So they're passing on this story, and then the final writer perhaps is a woman, or maybe it was one of the stories that women tended to tell more than men, and it got passed down orally and elaborated in such a way. I mean, Miriam, Moses' sister, was a prophetess in her own right, and I've read that what her writings were edited out of the Bible.
Yeah.
Or it would have been a Tanakh, because things tended to get edited out if they, involved women too much. So it could have been one of the stories was written by women.
Yes. There has been for a number of years a conversation around that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, are there certain portions of the Bible that were authored by women? So one of the struggles that we have is that we don't see too many women writing in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, the only one instance of a woman writing is Jezebel. And she is writing letters on behalf of her husband Ahab. And that's an interesting thing to encounter, because Jezebel is characterized as this very awful woman in the book of Kings. Yet she is the only woman who has that particular, who is demonstrated as having that skill. So the question of authorship and writing is a little bit a challenge to confirm. But what is quite possible is composition, so that women could engage in composing material even though they don't write it. And so what you're saying, Susan, is quite possible, that in a non-literate oral culture, women could compose the song, and then it becomes transmitted across the community from, in one way or the other, and preserved to the point where the writing stage occurs, and then it gets entered into writing. Now, you're right on task with two things in comparing Judges 5 with what's happening in Exodus with Miriam, because both of them are, as it were, victory songs, which we believe were the province of women, that women were the ones who would sing the song. I tend to think, though, that chapter 5 being presented as Deborah's song may not have been composed by a Deborah or a woman in its entirety. The first, maybe verses 3 to 4, I think maybe quite possible, and not necessarily the entire thing. Certainly in one setting, others on. But here's what's important to what Susan is saying. If you look at chapter 5, verse 1, one of the things it tells us is it starts off by saying, at that time, Deborah and Barak, Abinoam's son, sang. So rather than this being the song of the woman, it becomes this jointly performed song with a man and a woman. And I want to think verses 2 and 3 is the original song, the very first one that could have been done in the heat of the battle, and then subsequently other verses are added. But that's another debate. When you go to Exodus chapter 15 as well, a similar thing is taking place. Instead of Miriam being the singer of the song, Moses becomes the singer of the song. So that this is one of the places where we see the women getting erased in terms of how the song is sang. Now, here's the interesting thing, perhaps if you, depending upon your critical, it doesn't turn up in the critical Bible, so we know this in the Hebrew, that the subject of that verb in chapter 5, verse 1, sorry, the verb is a singular verb with a plural subject, Deborah and Barak, and the verb is singular, which leads a number of people to suggest, oh, initially this was one person singing, and then as the material is written and transposed from one scroll to the next, the second subject is added. I would leave you to guess who might have been the first singular subject, and then who was added in later on to create the plural subject. But you're on point there, Suzanne, in terms of how we think about the way in which now this issue of a song now being composed and the voice of women as a vehicle for telling their stories becomes an important thing for us to pay attention to. I mean, generally, what I tend to believe is that these systems could try to sort of do the erasure, do the suppression, do the oppression, but they ultimately fail. They don't ever succeed. Of course, the awful thing we have to come to terms with is that we have to put up with them while they're trying to do their best. Even though we know they will fail, they will still be working at it.
Go ahead, Suzanne. Let's keep the conversation going, unless others have a question.
I'm just so struck by the spatial things, the props, and the spatial things going on, and the theme in all of them is, in the whole book, is of like the last shall be first, or the trickery, like, hey, this was such a good trick. And for example, Deborah and Jael seem to like plot together. It's like, well, you're the important one here, but then I'm, she says, you do it, that kind of thing. but then this thing, and I had to go to the Tanakh to find this, the left-handedness. I thought, well, why is that mentioned? Left-handedness. Well, turns out he gives the knife as a gift. This is Ehud.
Mm-hmm.
Gives the knife to this king as a gift. And then the king takes it, thank you, puts it, because the king is right-handed, puts it into his, along his side. Then Ehud is left-handed. So he jumps out and grabs it with his left hand from the king's right side, which is something that most people being right-handed, the king wouldn't expect. And this is how he gets the jump on him. And then he plunges this knife into him, and they make a point that the guy is fat. And so he plunges it, and he has the sense to keep plunging because there's a lot of layers to get through. And then this sort of thing is repeated when Jael runs the nail through the enemy's head. And not only does she run it through his head, she runs it into the ground. She nails him to the ground. Okay, so you've got this same kind of image, spatial thing going on that is a trickery and a really like incredible thinking, like in three-dimensional chess. And I'm so struck with it. I got the guy is nailed to the ground. So even if he has an ounce of strength left in him, he's not going to overcome that. And then there's something further on about like wheat being threshed in the wine press to fool the enemy, and then this loaf of bread whirling through the air and knocking over the tents and turning them upside down. All these things kind of have the same resonance to me. They're all turning things inside out and using everything. It's like, okay, you other tribes, you don't use your women's brains, but we do. And we also use every kind of trick in the book. So that seems like the theme. I mean, it's almost, if you're looking at the props and the spatial things and instead of the actual story, that seems like the more powerful theme. I'm just, what do you think?
No, I'm listening to you. Thank you. Thanks for sharing those observations. I mean, certainly I would agree with you that there are a few chapters, in chapters 2 and 3, where we have these brief vignette stories of what are typically called the judges themselves, and they're mostly men. Deborah is the only woman who in the book who is characterized as a judge. That they are unusual characters and people who have to make their way through doing things in unconventional ways. And so if these men who in some way have a lot more social capital to have to resort to these measures of trickery, how much more so the women who have to do it. So there is that to kind of highlight how here is how one has to make their way in a world that is in many instances harsh and unrelenting, and it becomes an even more striking thing for women to do it. I mean, the spatial thing I never thought of, but you're correct. It's as I'm saying, for us to really try to pay attention to the visceral pieces that's there. May not give us a whole lot of details, but when it does, when the text does, let's pay attention to it. Yeah, so that this is not just, oh, she just kind of and I don't know, those of you who have a sense of what this is like, what does it mean to run a stake through someone's skull and then goes straight through and into the earth? What does it take to do that? I mean, and some people spend a lot of time trying to argue where she probably found the right spot and so on. Perhaps, maybe, I don't know. But again, don't miss the fact that this is not just a little pinprick. that it is huge. The sense that it is communicating to us is something we should not overlook.
Fascinating, great discussion. I'm conscious of our time. It's just coming up on 10:30. So I wanted to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Dr. Davidson. Thanks everyone for your patience on the technical. It's 2020. We have to expect these things are going to happen. It's just the nature of it. Dr. Davidson, do you have a sneak peek for next week? And then we can talk through the other chapters that we can share out with the participants?
Yes, I will send out that for you for next week. We will be, I think, next week we will go to chapter 13. Let's see. No, not 13. That's too early. Chapter 11. Yep, we'll go to chapter 11, which is the story of Jephthah's daughter.
Wonderful.
Yep.
You want to get ahead of your reading?
Yep.
And we'll share out with the group subsequent weeks so we can all be a little bit prepped and ahead. So again, thank you everyone. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you, Dr. Davidson. We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful week and we will see you all next Sunday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.